So thank you very much, Steffi, for that. And for all those of you that are now frantically Googling what the definition of deep tech is exactly, no, it is not what Google suggests, the obviously thrilling combination of deep house and techno music, but actually we're talking about innovations that are based on scientific advances that really have the potential to be a game changer. We heard in a previous panel, we heard about the problems that startups are facing when it comes to funding, when it comes to regulation. But just to outline, what we're talking about now is something even more specific. These are these people that want to fly to the moon, that want to build flying cars. One of them is sitting on stage with us. I will talk about him in a second. So these are really out-of-the-box, risky investments that not a lot of people have the courage to fund. And I'm very excited to talk to two very extraordinary entrepreneurs. Candance Johnson is a longtime friend of the DLD. She's one of the forethinkers in global infrastructure, science, and technology. She's a founder of SES, the world's preeminent satellite group that has annual revenues of more than $2 billion and reaches 99% of the global population. And I would just like to stress, because I think it's important to remember that all the time, she did all this at a time when women in the satellite business were far between. So I think that's an extraordinary achievement. And I would like you to welcome to the stage Candance Johnson, who's also a serial entrepreneur and president of the EBAN, the European Trade Association for Business Angels. Welcome, Candance. I mentioned it before, flying cars. Meet Martin Bruncko. He's the CFO at AeroMobil. That's a Bratislava-based manufacturer. And they want to redefine personal transportation systems. So if you're thinking Back to the Future, Marty McFly, yes, that's what it looks like. It's really fascinating. Have a look at it online. And there's a prototype that's already in regular flight testing, and they aim to go to market in about 2 or 3 years. He was previously a senior director at the World Economic Forum. He held positions in the government of Slovakia, and he also has his own venture fund, which is Steam Capital. Welcome, Martin Bruncko. Please give him a warm round of applause.
Thank you.
So Steffi just mentioned it. When it comes to deep tech, a lot of people still, they think Tesla, they think SpaceX, they think Silicon Valley. But we have a lot of promising firms in Europe, be it AeroMobil or Rimac, which is a Croatian-based manufacturer of electric cars, and many believe that to be even more innovative than Tesla. So, Martin, you have the first-hand experience of being a European deep techie. How do stakeholders react when you tell them that you have an idea like you and your colleagues had?
Well, if you tell somebody that you have a flying car, it's either the best or the worst conversation starter. So usually it's a good conversation starter. But in principle, I think there's a lot of excitement about companies that are really there to redefine the world, to really change the world. I think in Europe we have a fantastic base when it comes to deep tech, and I don't just mean great universities or great industrial heritage. We also have fantastic entrepreneurs here. You know, you mentioned Mate Rimac, who really has built what many consider the greatest electric sports car. You know, we have people who are building new space launchers, very innovative ones. You know, there are people who are building nuclear fusion reactors, and you know, these are all very, very serious people. But the real issue, I think, in Europe when it comes to deep tech is not lack of talent; it's lack of financing. So unless you're really based in Cambridge, maybe Munich, and you're doing a deep tech company, you're basically doomed to fail just because there's almost no venture, smart private money available to get you all the way to the final stage of bringing the product to the market. Because unlike developing an app or a piece of software or something internet-based, to develop a deep tech product like a flying car, it's not going to cost you, you know, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. It will cost you millions, probably tens of millions of dollars or euros.
Candance, what is your take on this? Do we have an ecosystem that works in Europe?
Well, I was just sharing with somebody that an entrepreneur never thinks that they failed. They just think that they have not succeeded yet. So to get things kind of a little bit going, I want everybody to stand up.
Okay, so please do Candance the favor.
Pull out your smartphones. With your right hand or with your left hand. Okay, are you ready? Okay. I've got the whole whole world in my hands. Come on, I've got to sing. The whole world in my hands. I've got the whole world in my hands. I've got the whole world in my hands. Okay, guys.
So Martin and I refrain from joining in because we're on the microphone. It's not nice.
We didn't have that.
So, you know, this is deep tech. This is from America. I mean, not from America, it's from Europe. And I want to tell you a story. You were talking about me being a woman satellite entrepreneur. But even CDMA, so, you know, the smartphone is a connection, it's a combination of GSM, which was a European standard, born here in Europe, and CDMA. Now, CDMA, which is Code Division Multiplex. Now, do you know who created CDMA? All right, Hedy Lamarr. Hedy Lamarr is the mother of CDMA. And she had the idea when she was leaving Austria to go to the United States, and she wanted to have a system that would detect and eventually shoot the torpedoes. And I'm a musician. Hedy saw that the piano rolls could be used for the technology to detect the torpedoes. And she created Code Division Multiplex. She has the patent on it. Now, I told this to Qualcomm, the founder of Qualcomm, Irwin Jacobs, and I said, you know, I also have a patent on distributed data technology networks. And I said, but I never made any money. He said, Candance, Hedy didn't make any money either. But, you know, Europe can be so proud of what we have achieved here in Europe. You know, with the GSM, which is really one of the world's largest revenue generators, with DBS, which is the DVB, the Digital Video Broadcasting Standard, with MP3, with Industry 4.0, with energy. Look at all of the windmills. Look at the solar technology, all coming from Europe. So, you know, I have loved being here today, and I've loved being here because there's so much positive, you know, positive thinking. And I thought that the government people were also beautiful in that they're working on this project that we call Europe. And when I started the Astra Satellite Company, it wasn't to do a new satellite, you know, company. Although the innovation was actually not in the satellite building, it was in the satellite reception equipment, because gallium arsenide was just upcoming and was helping make it much cheaper for satellite signals to be received. It was to create and help exchange European culture. So, you know, I think Europe has so much to offer the world, and my goal as president of EBAN, and also I'm very happy that Peter Jungen is here he is our president emeritus, and together we put together a concept called the Innovation Europe Fund, where we're trying to raise 6 billion euros to invest from private investors, and a little bit helped by the government, you know, to invest in Europe's scientists and researchers.
You mentioned a couple of great achievements. You have a CFO sitting next to you, so he wants to know where the money's coming from and where the money is going. You mentioned, for example, MP3, which is then something was taken from the Americans and made into a huge business.
It was taken by the Americans.
Yeah, taken by the Americans, that's what I mean. So we obviously have innovation and we have good ideas, but we obviously have a problem of bringing it to market, which is something that the European Union recognize. There's a, for those that don't know it, there's an annual innovation report by the European Commission. They admit that the EU is lagging behind other countries, and they have some key findings that I would like to discuss with you. One is that they're suggesting more partnerships between public and private funding. So they want to bring $350 billion additionally to the market. You mentioned that you've been helped in the past by a little bit of state money. What is your take on that? Is that, maybe start with you, do we need public and private partnerships to drive deep tech?
Actually, in my own ventures, I've never been helped by by public money. And I think that in any public-private partnership, that it has to be the private sector who is leading. I feel very, very strongly about this. Also, you know, whoever said that private individuals and private sector cannot finance just about anything and make it be a good business plan? You know, when we did start Astra, SES, we were very fortunate. We had all of these bankers. This is 1983. There were no venture capitalists in 1983 in Europe. There were no, you know, I mean, public-private partnership, forget it. But we had these bankers in Luxembourg, and this was the one project that they could work on all together. And so we had the best bankers sitting there saying, okay, how much money can we ask per channel, and how much can we let our satellite cost and our launcher cost? And, you know, we will have to do an RFP. And if the people don't get to the point where we want, we're not going to do this project. It had to make money. Nobody was going to pay us. And so, you know, I think private investment and market-oriented venture is the way to go for just about everything.
Martin, how do you think about it?
Well, I agree that it has to be led by the private sector. But if you look at deep tech, whether in Europe or even the United States, there's always a big role to be played by the state. And I would argue that neither SpaceX or Tesla would exist if it wasn't for public money, right? There's a significant amount of either subsidies or very early stage contracts coming from the state, which essentially took significant part of the risk upon the state. Now, why is it so important that it has to be a partnership? I mean, if you look at the classical digital company, as I said, that costs a couple dozen thousand to develop a product. But if you're and you can develop it very quickly. But if you're developing a product for 5-10 years and it costs you 50 million, and there's massive amount of risk which the private sector very often is not willing to take up on itself. Now, we're not saying, of course, I'm not saying that we should now have government fund private enterprises, but actually, as it stands already today, EU is spending more than 100 billion euros a year on R&D grants. So it's more about reallocating money, which is based maybe sometimes being spent very wastefully on some other grants which don't lead to actual products, on something that is private sector led and initiated and properly managed.
So I feel very strongly that governments do need to fund deep research, deep science, and even to a point, deep technology. But the moment that this can be commercialized, then we need to have business people. And what I have suggested to the European Research Council and also to the European Commission is that we do a business plan for Europe's researchers and scientists. And Yossi's not here, but actually my father, General Johnny Johnson, was one of the founders of the Israeli venture capital community. And, I've used this example.
Which incidentally was launched by public intervention, right?
So I want to use this example. So what happened, this was 1990, and what happened was that in 1990, Israel, all of a sudden, got all of the scientists and the researchers of the Jewish faith coming to Israel. These people had received billions of dollars of research funding by the USSR. And the point is, though, that rather than calling other scientists, the president of Israel called American venture capitalists and said, can you come and can you help us do something with all of these researchers? Now, of course, there was also the military in Israel. That technology, just like in the United States, a lot of my friends tell me, hey, Candace, you're against research, you're against public money, but look at the military in the United States. Absolutely right. I'm not against it. A lot of money has been spent in military technology by the United States, just like it has been spent in Europe here for the research. This is all great, but what we need to do is we need to have a process whereby we transform. We were talking about transforming deep tech. So I'm talking about transforming deep tech with a business plan.
Okay. One of the ways that you could do that, transform it into a business plan, is one of the other key findings of this innovation report, that we don't have a really working single European market, which would be the question, Martin, to you. What role do you think the politicians, what role should regulation play in this?
I think single market is critical, and particularly in deep tech, which requires, as I said, tens of millions of investment just to develop the product. You want to have regulatory clarity. You want to make sure that if you develop a product, if it's a flying car or even just a new car, that you can sell it, that you won't have a government official or regulator who will come and say, sorry, I don't like this or that feature because it's just not safe. So now what's really helping actually AeroMobil is the fact that we do have a single regulatory framework for both cars and airplanes in Europe. So that means that...
When did you develop that? Because obviously you would have thought you working as you're going along, and then when do you get the regulations in?
Well, we're actually, here, I'll show you how important for regulation is for us. It's so important that we decided that it doesn't make sense for us to develop a great product only to find out, $50 million later that we can't really sell it because somebody doesn't like it. I mean, some regulator or public official. That's why from the very first moment, we've been developing it according to existing regulatory standards. So AeroMobil will be certified separately as a car according to existing legislation, and separately as a plane according to existing legislation. Now, this is very important for our investors because this way they know that nobody can come from the government and tell us, sorry, you can't sell it. Because if they would tell us that, we said, sorry, we can. Look, there's a very clear regulation here. We build this product according to the regulation, and why, you can't really prevent us. So, I know that, for example, in Silicon Valley, there's often this period, we're build a great product with the innovators, who cares? Government will follow. Well, not quite. And Elon Musk likes to say this, but I incidentally spoke to one of his early investors in Tesla, and they told us, yeah, right, this was exactly our spirit. We're the great innovators. We don't care about regulation. Eventually, the regulators came and told us, sorry, guys, we don't like what you're doing. And it cost us a lot of money and a lot of time to fix this. So I think what we really need is smart, flexible, and most importantly, really clear and predictable regulatory environment.
So if I may, I agree partially with you. So first of all, I've been known to say that regulation never stopped anything good from happening, and certainly as a telecoms and satellite entrepreneur, for the first half of my professional life, I had to work with monopolies and governments. It was not allowed to have a private broadcasting company. It was not allowed to have a private telecoms company. It was not allowed to have a private satellite company. It was not allowed to go into Eastern Germany and to do private telcos and make those cities and everything grow, because we had to wait for the Deutsche Telekom to come, because they were the only ones who were allowed to do this. So, my feeling is that governments, as Dr. Schwarz-Schilling he was the Minister of Telecoms, used to always tell me, governments can deregulate, governments can set policy, but governments cannot do. And so entrepreneurs need to do. And if we need to create regulation that is going to help us, then we have to do that. So at the moment, I just came back from Estonia, where I am an e-resident. And, in December 2014, I wrote with a couple of other colleagues the E-Zone paper for Mr. Juncker when he was talking about the Juncker plan. And, being a satellite person, you take the view from up top. You don't see the barriers. And so all of the people, at the European Commission told me, oh, Candance, this is impossible. You'll never be able to do this. And I said, but I think we will, because don't forget, I created Astra, and we covered all of Europe with one satellite beam. We can do the same thing. And so this E-Zone for entrepreneurs and investors, we're now working with the e-residency program, where all investors, all entrepreneurs, all researchers will be subject to the same laws all across Europe, and that we will be able to have a scalable market for all of our investments and the entrepreneurs for all of their wonderful inventions. And the thing about having a European market is that then that is when you really can invest in deep tech, because you're talking very often about infrastructure. So, you're talking about satellites, you're talking about energy, you're talking about, my gosh, look at what is going to happen with transport and logistics. With drones, we may just forget about highways. With Hyperloop, we'll forget about trains.
Or as we have to foresee this. Where we're going, we don't need roads.
Well, exactly, the AeroMobil. And my friends, my friends in Saudi Arabia, my women friends in Saudi Arabia, they were already thinking about flying cars because they said, Candance, if we have a flying car, this is not really driving, so we can transport ourselves.
Especially if it's self-flying, which is also what we're working on.
Before we turn into an advertising panel for the initial products, I would actually, because unfortunately we've run out of time, we need to wrap it up. Since I have two people on stage that are obviously thinking out of the box, could you just give me a short statement? What do you think deep tech, what can we expect? What will we see in a couple of years? I know that you're a great fan of innovation in space. I don't know, Martin, would you like to begin? What are we going to see? What's going to surprise us?
I think we're going to see huge innovations in transport. And I really don't mean just flying cars, but really, I just recently read that digital advertising, it's a $200 billion market roughly right now, which supports most of these internet giants. Transportation is 10 trillion. So there's a lot of innovation coming in there. I think we're going to see massive innovations in energy. I think really those people who claim that energy is going to become something which is almost free, I think we'll be very surprised, but it's going to come much, much quicker than we think. And last but not least, I think we're going to see some really, really cool stuff in robotics combined with artificial intelligence. Some of them very exciting. Some of it might be actually very scary. But I think the world is going to look very, very different. Visibly look very, very different, because digital technologies have changed our world, but they're not really, you can't really see it as much if you look into a physical space, but with the deep tech, we're really going to see it very, very soon and big time.
Candance, what about you?
Yes, so, 20 years ago, Hughes Satellite Systems asked me if I would come up with the kind of blue sky thing, and I told them, I said, I think everybody will have their own satellites, and certainly that is happening now. But what I think is really, really important is that increasingly the world is going to be wireless. So whether it be, wireless mobile, whether it be drones, whether it be satellites, I think that this will happen, and it will happen because we need to have interconnectivity, interactivity, and connectivity, and we need to have it almost immediately. And that is, I've always said, why people have asked me why I like satellites, and I like it because of its immediate infrastructure. But I think, and this is a challenge really to everybody, because actually Martin and I found out he's a philosopher and I'm a musician. And I've said this many times, actually at DLD conferences, but I do think that the world is networked, and that the most beautiful network is actually a Bach fugue, where each note, is like a piece or a data piece of an object-oriented technology network. And, if we're thinking about artificial intelligence, I think we also have to think about the brain. And I think that the deepest tech, and this is what I'm hoping, is going to come with our being able to harness the power of what is absolutely the most beautiful creation, and that is the human brain.
Wonderful. I would like to leave that as a closing remark, invite you all to continue this discussion after this panel. Candance, thank you very much. Martin, thank you ever so much. Please give a warm round of applause.